Has llegado a misterios de la oscuridad. En este espacio prohibido, la noche oculta verdades demasiado aterradoras para ser reveladas a la luz del día. Aquí, los misterios que emergen del abismo oscuro desvelan secretos que harán temblar tu cordura. Las historias que estás por descubrir desafiarán todo lo que creías conocer, envolviéndote en un torbellino de miedos y enigmas. Ten cuidado al avanzar, pues algunas puertas, una vez abiertas, nunca podrán cerrarse, y sus revelaciones podrían costarte más de lo que imaginas. A prickle traced my forearms the moment I turned onto the farm's neglected drive. Its sign, ravaged by sun and time, hung askew above a gravel expanse empty save for my rented sedan. Near the main house entrance, a figure consulted his watch, leaning with weary patience against a porch post. At first glance, the homestead seemed merely forgotten. Paint curling away from weathered wood, the porch roof listing slightly, a fractured wind vane frozen atop the gable. Yet an undercurrent hummed beneath the ordinary, a dissonance I couldn't place. 2 hours I'd driven, lured by fragmented tales of the peculiar. I hadn't anticipated finding anything that would burrow deep, but the place already felt wrong. Approaching the waiting guide, I offered a hand. His grip was firm, his manner civil but abstracted. Tours still ran, he explained, despite the property's slow surrender to entropy in places. He spoke elliptically of the former occupants, of successive waves of hardship they'd weathered. Hardships? I prompted. A non-committal shrug. Afflictions, conflagrations, the kind of relentless strain that unravels families, he murmured. Details, however, would have to wait for the formal circuit inside the house. Perhaps 10 of us convened in the entrance hall, a somber gallery where stern, monochrome faces stared from the walls, men and women corseted by convention and time. We trailed another docent through chambers thick with dust motes dancing in faint light, past furniture draped in ghostly shrouds. Velvet ropes barred access to areas where floorboards groaned under the potential weight of our curiosity. A profound quiet pressed in, swallowing the scuff of shoes and whispered comments. No birdsong drifted from outside, no currents stirred the stale air. The house felt sealed, poised to absorb us. Our guide recounted calamities, harvests obliterated by freak storms, a barn inferno consuming vital machinery, whispers of crippling debt. Eventually, abandonment claimed the farm, until distant kin resurrected it, partially for tourists. He mentioned almost casually that some claimed to hear voices after dark, faint dialogues in empty rooms. Shadows, too, were said to flit across upstairs windows long after closing. I felt a familiar skepticism rise, the kind reserved for staged hauntings, but then I registered the guide's unnerving sincerity. His voice held no theatrical tremor, only the flat tone of someone reporting established, if unsettling, facts. We exited the main dwelling, crossing the sparse yard towards a smaller, secondary structure. A workshop, perhaps, or storage. Rusted implements clung to the interior walls, some identified by the guide as original artifacts. It was around the time this outbuilding was erected, he explained, that the family's misfortunes began to truly escalate. He alluded to frayed tempers, to nights stolen by anxiety. No explicit mention of death, yet his narrative painted a picture of spirits crushed under relentless pressure. After this, the small assembly dispersed, individuals wandering the grounds at their own pace. I lingered, seeking out the second guide again. Were there specific phenomena, I asked, recurring accounts from different visitors? He hesitated, eyes glancing towards the weathered barn. People sometimes report seeing a woman, he conceded, his voice lowered slightly. Walking the property after dusk, in white or something pale, looking troubled. He admitted the tale wasn't solely from tourists. Other guides whispered of it too. Some accounts included faint cries, as if she were searching. A fleeting, uncertain smile touched his lips, betraying a discomfort with the telling. Then, murmuring an excuse, he moved off to rejoin the scattered group. For another hour, I explored the open spaces, circling the cavernous barn, peering into smaller sheds, tracing the overgrown field lines. Late afternoon light thickened into haze. The air hung heavy, my shirt sticking damply to my spine. Each corner turned brought a flicker of expectation, the sense of a presence just out of sight, but revealed nothing more than brittle weeds and the crunch of my boots on the path. Only the whisper of wind along the fence broke the stillness. By the time I finished my solitary circuit, the farm was preparing to close, its gates secured promptly at 5. Down the road, barely a mile distant, sat a modest inn called Country Rest, marked by a simple wooden sign beside a short driveway. I parked, retrieved my overnight bag, and approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter offered a key and minimal conversation. My room, second floor, overlooked a dense screen of trees separating the inn's property from an adjacent field. I unpacked, then drove a few blocks for a solitary dinner at a local diner, the farm's oppressive atmosphere clinging to my thoughts. The guide's stories replayed, the fires, the debts, the slow disintegration. Had the sheer weight of their suffering somehow saturated the land itself? Theories about places retaining emotional residue surfaced in my mind, but I dismissed them as tourist bait, local legends amplified for effect. Darkness had fully descended by my return. Sleep, I decided, was the priority. I planned another visit to the farm come morning. Around midnight, however, a peculiar sensation jolted me awake. Nothing specific, just a sense of disturbance in the quiet room. Lying still, listening to the air conditioner's low hum, I stared at the ceiling. Then came the sound, faint, indistinct, yet unsettlingly like someone calling my name. Imagination, I told myself. A dream fragment snagged on the edge of consciousness. But it came again. "Hey, you there?" A low, questioning tone. My heart hammered against my ribs. A clammy dampness bloomed on my palms. I swung my legs out of bed, crossed to the window. Outside, the night was absolute, save for the weak circle of light cast by the inn sign near the drive. Beyond that small illumination, the trees and the field were lost in impenetrable black. Pressing my face close to the cool glass, I strained to see. The voice whispered again, softer now, closer, definitely aimed at me. Yet the darkness remained empty. A knot tightened in my stomach. Adrenaline surged, tingling down my arms and legs. My hands trembled, my breathing grew shallow and quick. Sliding the window open a few inches, I felt a cool draft brush my skin. Then another whisper, seemingly just beyond the screen. Still, no one visible. But then, a flicker of white near the tree line. Not a trick of light, not a reflection, It possessed the distinct shape and movement of a figure clad in pale fabric. I froze, caught between calling out and shrinking back. "Hello?" The word emerged thin, unsteady. "Is someone there?" Silence answered, punctuated only by the faint rustle of leaves somewhere in the darkness. Seconds stretched, then movement again. The figure drifted nearer, stepping partially into the weak glow from the inn sign. A woman, it seemed, in a long light-colored dress. Her head turned, a slow, searching gesture. My pulse leaped, my mouth suddenly parched. I blinked rapidly, trying to dispel the image, convince myself it was illusion. She seemed to look towards my window. Her face remained indistinct, a pale oval in the gloom, but her posture radiated anxiety, a desperate tension in her shoulders. She looked like someone pleading for aid without uttering a sound. I remained locked in silence, my knuckles white where I gripped the windowsill. Then, as slowly as she had appeared, she turned, retreated into the consuming blackness beyond the trees, and was gone. The field breathed silence once more. I stood rooted, waiting, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ears. Minutes might have passed. My mind raced. Should I go outside? Check the grounds? Could it have been a real person in distress? Yet something about the figure's silent glide, its sudden appearance and disappearance, felt profoundly unnatural. Hesitation warred with urgency. Finally, grabbing a flashlight from my car, I descended the stairs and circled around the back of the inn. Gravel crunched loudly underfoot. I could feel the throb of blood in my neck. The trees loomed, their darkness absolute between the trunks. I swept the flashlight beam across the area, its pale eye finding nothing. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, quickly absorbed by the night. After several minutes of fruitless searching, a chill unrelated to the night air settled over me. The sensation of being watched intensified. Defeated, I returned to my room, bolted the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, utterly awake. The remembered whisper echoed relentlessly in my mind. Sleep finally claimed me sometime near 3. A shallow, uneasy surrender. The next conscious sensation was sunlight striping the floor and the insistent buzz of my phone alarm. Rest had eluded me. My eyes felt gritty, muscles tight with residual tension. Dressing quickly, I went downstairs. The innkeeper inquired about my sleep. I managed a nod, offering no details of the night's disturbance. Back at the farm, the morning air felt cooler, cleaner. A faint breeze stirred the leaves as I parked. The same guide from the previous afternoon spotted me and offered a wave. We walked towards the rear of the main house. I confronted him directly. Had anyone else, visitors or locals, ever mentioned seeing a woman in white near the inn, outside the farm's official boundary? He met my gaze, paused, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes, a few scattered reports over the years, voices heard in the dead of night, a fleeting figure glimpsed in the fields between the farm and the inn. Most described a woman, pale clothing, an air of confusion or distress. Some dismissed it, a local eccentric, perhaps, but no confirmation ever surfaced. Others blamed suggestion, the power of the farm's ominous reputation. Yet he added the consistency across unrelated accounts was difficult to ignore entirely. He'd never witnessed it himself, but he'd heard enough to believe. Something strange lingered. A strange wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone in this. I recounted my experience, the voice seeming to call my name, the figure by the trees. He questioned whether I was certain it used my actual name. I conceded uncertainty. Perhaps it was a muffled sound my half-awake mind interpreted personally. But the visual, the figure itself, that I insisted, was undeniable. He suggested I speak with another guide, one with deeper roots at the farm. He led me towards a small shed near the barn, where an older man, crowned with a straw hat, methodically swept the threshold. Introductions were made, and I recounted the previous night's events. The older man listened patiently, leaning his broom against the weathered wood when I finished. People had described that woman for decades, he stated calmly. He recalled one couple insisting she tapped on their inn window around 2 a.m. Another guest reported hearing distinct footsteps on the inn's porch, only to find it empty. Descriptions varied slightly: a white gown, pale clothes, but the core elements remained. Her identity, unknown. Her intent, never hostile, he mused, just sorrowful, perhaps searching. The remainder of the morning I spent tracing the farm's perimeter, seeking any logical explanation. A hidden path connecting to the inn? Evidence of someone regularly traversing the fields at night? I found only dilapidated fences, thickets of thorns, and a few faint animal trails. No fresh footprints, no signs of human passage. Around noon, returning towards the main house, the first guide intercepted me. Would I be interested in seeing the second floor? Normally restricted, but the owners permitted occasional access for the genuinely curious, provided caution was exercised. We ascended a narrow, creaking staircase into a dim upper hallway where the floorboards felt suspiciously soft underfoot. He gestured towards a bedroom, its antique furniture obscured by dust sheets. The windows offered a view across the very fields bordering the inn property. From this vantage point, he confirmed, farm staff had occasionally reported spotting a pale figure out there, usually near dawn or late dusk. I confessed the visceral fear that had seized me the night before, the pins and needles sensation crawling up my arms as I saw the figure by the trees, the sheer dread of what might happen if I opened the window wider. He nodded with quiet understanding. I realized my hand was clamped tight around the banister, knuckles stark white, echoing my grip on the windowsill hours earlier. We descended back to the ground floor. The formal tour concluded shortly after, the small group drifting towards the inevitable gift shop near the exit. Stepping back into the sunlight, I watched the others chatting near their cars. Would any of them experience something tonight? A part of me felt a perverse urge to stay, to test the darkness again. But the unease was too profound, the exhaustion too deep. Just as I reached my car, the older guide in the straw hat caught my eye and waved me over. "Might be nothing," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But if you happen to see her again, try speaking to her. Some say she vanishes if you acknowledge her directly." Had anyone ever received a reply? I asked. He shook his head slowly. Most froze, he admitted, or hid. But perhaps it was worth trying. I offered my thanks, slid behind the wheel. A faint tremor persisted in my hands as I turned the key. In the rearview mirror, the farm receded, the house paint dull and flaking under the midday sun, the barn listing perceptibly, the fields behind rippling in the breeze. The image of the woman turning her head, listening, searching, imprinted itself behind my eyes, tightening my chest. It felt undeniably real, that unsettling moment suspended between shadow and light. I pointed the car towards the highway, the debate, stay or go, finally settling. One night had been sufficient immersion in that place's peculiar sorrow. I wasn't sure I possessed the fortitude for a second encounter. My shoulders ached with accumulated tension, a soreness I didn't fully register until the city skyline appeared on the horizon. Days later, pursuing a lingering thread of unease, I phoned the farm office. Explaining my visit and my unsettling experience, I inquired if recent reports mirrored mine. The voice on the line confirmed, matter-of-factly, that yes, descriptions of a woman in white, often accompanied by nocturnal voices, continued intermittently. No explanation had ever been found. The occurrences seemed random, tied neither to specific dates nor locations, sometimes near the inn, sometimes within the farm's own boundaries. Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of validation and deeper disquiet. My experience wasn't unique, yet the mystery remained absolute. Who was she? Why did she linger? Vague stories of ancestral hardship offered no solid clues. An echo of past trauma, perhaps, or merely folklore feeding overwrought imaginations. All I possessed was the chilling certainty of my own encounter, the faint, searching whisper that still occasionally troubles the edges of my sleep. That was the shape of it. Curiosity drew me to the decaying farm. Guides spoke of tragedy amidst the creaking timbers and overgrown paths. A night in a nearby inn brought a voice from the darkness, a spectral figure by the trees, desperate, lost. Confirmation came the next day. Others had seen her too. I departed with frayed nerves and a racing pulse. Even now, recalling that night sends a current down my spine. I see her still, a pale silhouette against the black tree line, trapped in a loop of time, forever searching, forever waiting to be seen. Dawn revealed the forest floor's indictment, a perfect unbroken ring of impressions encircling my fragile shelter. No sound had betrayed their making, no tremor in the earth. Yet there they lay, mute proof that my solitude in these deep woods was a fragile illusion. I, Ilara, had sought refuge in the Viridian peaks, fleeing the city's grinding dissonance. A heart splintered by betrayal, a livelihood dissolved into air. I craved the vast, indifferent quiet of the wild, a space to sift through the wreckage and perhaps rediscover the shape of myself beneath the rubble. This pilgrimage into isolation had felt like salvation. Simply me, the breathing wilderness, the unfolding scroll of my own thoughts. 3 days I'd walked, pushing deeper into the back country, the ache in my thighs a welcome anchor, the alpine air a balm. Last night's camp seemed blessed, a small sequestered meadow beside a stream whose ceaseless murmur promised peace. Pitch in the tent, coaxing flames from dry tinder. A tranquility I hadn't known in months had finally begun to thread itself through me. That fragile peace dissolved the instant my zipper rasped open this morning. The prints, gargantuan, far exceeding my own boot size, pressed deep into the yielding soil. Their maker carried significant weight, and the sheer number forming that meticulous circle, as if some entity had spent the night in slow, deliberate orbit around my sleeping form. A coldness wholly unrelated to the mountain dawn traced its way down my spine. Encounters with wildlife, shy deer, a lumbering black bear glimpsed through trees, were part of the pact with nature. This felt different. This felt intentional. Breathe, Ilara. Think. An animal, surely. Curious about this unfamiliar scent invading its domain. No cause for alarm. Yet the logic felt hollow. Prudence whispered retreat. As my hands began the familiar motions of dismantling camp, a sharp crack split the forest stillness behind me. I spun, heart vaulting against my ribs. Nothing but silent ancient trees met my gaze, their impassive trunks revealing no secrets. Still, the unnerving certainty of being observed prickled the back of my neck, an invisible weight in the air. My packing accelerated, order abandoned for haste, gear crammed into the rucksack with clumsy urgency. Another disturbance, a heavy rustling in the undergrowth, too substantial for any squirrel. I pivoted again, eyes raking the dense tree line. Was that something? A flicker at the edge of vision, a density darker than the shadows it inhabited. A blink, and it was gone. Backpack shouldered, I forewent the usual rituals, dousing the embers, a final sight check. Escape was the only imperative. Choosing a direction away from that perceived flicker, I moved, my walk rapidly escalating towards a desperate flight. The woods had transformed, no longer a sanctuary, now a labyrinth of lurking threats. Shadows clung possessively to every trunk. Each snapped twig, each bird's cry became a jolt of adrenaline. I fumbled with my map, trying to orient myself towards the main trail, but my trembling fingers rendered the lines a meaningless spider web. An hour or so passed, a frantic scramble through unfamiliar terrain. The initial surge of panic subsided, leaving a residue of cold, gnawing dread. Nothing further seen, nothing heard. Perhaps I had succumbed to fear, conjuring phantoms from stress and isolation. Perhaps. Spying a moss-covered fallen giant, I sank onto it, uncapping my water bottle with shaking hands. A long, necessary swallow. As I lowered the bottle, my gaze snagged on movement. 50 yards distant, framed between two colossal pines, stood a figure. My breath hitched. It mimicked a human form, yet felt profoundly wrong. Too attenuated, impossibly tall, its proportions subtly skewed in a way that raised the hairs on my arms. It remained utterly immobile, watching. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the apparition away. Opened them. It remained. Closer now. I scrambled upright, stumbling over the log. The figure advanced a single, fluid step. For a heartbeat, I saw its face, or rather the horrifying absence of one. A smooth, pallid oval, devoid of any feature, like stretched parchment waiting for an artist who never arrived. A scream clawed at my throat, strangled by sheer terror. I turned and bolted, map forgotten, trail irrelevant. Away, just away. Underbrush tore at me, branches whipping exposed skin. Behind, I sensed it, a pursuit unnervingly swift, unnervingly graceful. No crashing sounds, just a relentless presence gaining ground. Faster I ran, faster it seemed to glide. A backward glance, instant regret. It was there, Impossibly close, 10 feet perhaps, elongated arms reaching. I surged forward, a final desperate burst, feet finding purchase on the uneven forest floor, then finding none. My boot caught a treacherous root. The world tilted and I plunged downward, tumbling helplessly down a steep, unseen embankment. Rolling, bouncing, agony flaring with each impact against rock and root. A final jarring halt on my back at the gully's base expelled all air from my lungs. For a sickening moment, darkness encroached as I fought to draw breath. Lying there, gasping, waves of nausea washing over me, I braced for the touch of those pale, elongated hands. Silence. Nothing came. Slowly, achingly, I pushed myself upright. I was in a narrow ravine, steep earthen walls rising on either side. No sign of my pursuer. A hasty self-assessment. Myriad cuts, blooming bruises, a likely sprain in my wrist. My pack had cushioned the worst. Battered, scraped raw, but miraculously whole. As breath steadied and adrenaline ebbed, doubt slithered back. Had I truly witnessed that thing? Or was it a waking nightmare, born of solitude and recent trauma? The rational mind craved hallucination, but the visceral memory, the footprints, the vacant stare, that smooth, featureless face, resisted dismissal. Climbing back up that embankment, back towards the potential horror, felt unthinkable. The gully angled downhill. Water seeks lower ground, finds rivers, leads outward. A thin thread of logic, but my only one. I began to walk, each step a negotiation with pain. The ravine narrowed, its rocky bed demanded careful footing. Trees loomed overhead, their dense canopy stealing the sunlight, deepening the gloom. As I limped onward, I wrestled with explanations. A prankster in elaborate costume, a bear reared unnaturally, fear's own projection. Each felt inadequate, flimsy against the stark terror I'd experienced. The alternative, that something inexplicable, something other, resided in these woods, was a thought too dreadful to fully entertain. Hours bled away. The gully offered no release, no sign of widening into a valley or meeting a larger stream. My water dwindled. The few crushed bars in my pack mocked my growing hunger. Worse still, the sounds returned. Susurrations on the breeze that sounded chillingly like whispers. The phantom crunch of footfalls just beyond sight. Each time I whirled, heart hammering, only emptiness greeted me. But the sensation of being stalked, of unseen eyes tracking my every pained step, never ceased. Light began to fail, painting the encroaching forest in shades of bruised purple and gray. Panic surged anew. Not here, not in the dark, not with it potentially lurking. I forced my protesting body into a shambling jog, just as despair threatened to buckle my knees, to make me curl into a fetal ball and surrender. I saw it, a thinning of the trees ahead, a hint of open space. Hope, sharp and unexpected, lent me a final surge. I burst from the gully's confines and staggered onto the edge of a town. Lamplight spilled from windows. The distant hum of engines reached my ears. Never had the mundane artifacts of civilization seemed so profoundly beautiful. I stumbled towards the lights, acutely aware of the startled glances from the few people I passed. I knew the picture I presented, smeared with dirt and blood, clothes torn, eyes wide with a terror that bordered on madness. The sheriff's office became my beacon. I collapsed onto a chair in the small reception area. The deputy who took my report was gentle, his professional calm tinged with understandable skepticism. He logged my disjointed story, radioed about potential overdue hikers, and arranged a room for me at the town's sole motel. That night, cocooned in the sterile anonymity of the motel room, every light defiantly ablaze, I tried to believe it was finished. Safety, civilization, streetlights and locked doors, and the comforting proximity of other humans. Surely the thing from the woods, whether real or imagined, could not breach this world. Yet closing my eyes conjured only that smooth, blank visage. And in the quiet intervals, between the rumble of passing trucks and the drone of the air conditioner, phantom whispers seemed to curl at the edge of hearing. Sleep refused me that night and the next. Even back in my own apartment, days later, the city's familiar noise failed to drown the unease. Weeks unfolded, yet shadows still held menace. Unexpected sounds still made me flinch. My own reflection sometimes startled me, because I carried a chilling certainty deep within. You can stumble out of the wilderness, but fragments of it cling to you, embed themselves under your skin, and somewhere, nestled in the vast, silent, secret places of the earth, something waits, something watches, and perhaps one day it will resume its search. A sharp retort fractured the woodland quiet, an eruption that sent avian life vaulting skyward in a panic of wings. The second impact, closer, spat wood splinters against my cheek from the pine beside me. In that stinging moment, the truth struck cold. This wasn't merely trespass, the illicit taking of game. They were hunting me. My name is Ilara. For 5 circuits of the seasons, I've walked the trails of Whispering Pines National Forest as a ranger. It's more than employment, it's a devotion to the rustling canopy above, the wild heartbeat within, the quiet lessons of preservation shared with those who wander through. Yet no manual, no field exercise could have armored me for that particular dawn. It began as most days did, under a sky scrubbed clean and promising autumn. My patrol route led north, into territory flagged for potential poaching incursions. Silence reigned, profound and ancient, the air sharp with the coming chill. I recall the slant of sunlight, how it turned the turning leaves into stained glass. Deeper I walked, and the forest began whispering warnings. Branches snapped unnaturally low, the understory bruised, impressions in the loam that spoke of something other than deer or bear. A prickling along my spine insisted, wrong, wrong. But duty propelled me forward. Investigate. That was the charge. Then a glint beneath the ferns, incongruous, metallic. My pulse quickened. Approaching with measured steps, I parted the fronds. There lay a snare, not the crude wire loops sometimes found, but a formidable, illegal device built for creatures of significant size. This escalated things. Poachers were a known nuisance, but this suggested organization, a chilling proficiency. My radio crackled to life as I relayed the coordinates, the find, the request for immediate support. Mid-sentence, Distant voices drifted through the trees. Instantly, I thumbed the transmission silent, shrinking down, unwilling to broadcast my position. I crept towards the sound. 2 figures materialized, clad in mottled camouflage, cradling rifles designed for distance and power. Their low conversation confirmed my fears. Talk of quotas, of shipments. This was no crime of opportunity. It was methodical harvest. Evidence. I needed proof. With painstaking slowness, my hand sought the camera at my belt. Capture their faces, their weaponry. That would build the case. I lifted the lens, framed the shot, and depressed the shutter. The subtle click resonated like a dropped stone in a well. Heads snapped towards me, rifles swinging up in unison. I became stone, praying the dappled light concealed me. An eternity stretched within a handful of heartbeats. Then a silent gesture between them, and they began advancing, deliberate, predatory. Retreat. Now. Quietly, I eased backward, but haste betrayed me. A brittle twig fractured underfoot, the sound impossibly loud. There! The shout ripped through the stillness. The first shot followed, a violent punctuation. I didn't pause to analyze intent. I fled. Branches lashed my face. Thorns tore at my clothes as I plunged through the dense undergrowth. Behind me, shouts, the crashing sounds of pursuit. The second shot chewed bark from a trunk inches away, and icy dread flooded me. They weren't trying to frighten. They aimed to silence. My legs pumped, fueled by a terror I'd never known. Lungs scorched, muscles screamed, but the primal need to survive overrode all pain. This forest was my domain. Familiarity, my sole advantage. Thoughts fractured, desperate for a strategy. The nearest station lay miles distant. The radio deep in this hollow was useless. I was utterly alone. Veering from any semblance of a path, I aimed for the cave system etched into my mental map of the park. If I could reach that rocky sanctuary, perhaps the labyrinthine tunnels would swallow me, confound my hunters. The gurgle of moving water reached me. Hope flickered. The caves lay just beyond the stream, but emerging from the tree line, that hope withered. Recent downpours had transformed the typically serene brook into a churning, muddy beast. Hesitation seized me. Crossing looked suicidal. But the sounds of pursuit, closer now, offered no choice. Risk it. The water's shock was glacial, its current a brutal hand shoving me downstream. My boots slid on slick, unseen stones. Midstream, my footing vanished. The world inverted, a chaos of cold, tumbling water, choked breath. Fighting towards the light, I surfaced, gasping, water streaming from my eyes. Through the blur, the dark maw of the cave rushed nearer. A final desperate surge of adrenaline propelled me forward. My fingers closed around an outcrop of rock. I hauled my sodden, trembling body onto the cave floor, collapsing in a heap of shivers and racking coughs. No respite. Shouts echoed from the far bank. They were still coming. Staggering upright, I plunged into the absolute black. My hands became my eyes, tracing the cold, rough-hewn walls. Splashing sounds behind me. They were crossing. I forced myself faster, ignoring the stabs of pain as I collided with unseen formations. The passage twisted, bifurcated. I chose turns at random, praying the maze would favor me. Minutes later, or perhaps an age, I stumbled into a small chamber. A sliver of light from a fissure high above painted a dim circle on the floor, revealing a space barely large enough to conceal a crouching form. It would have to suffice. I squeezed into a narrow crevice, forcing my breathing into shallow, silent rhythms. Waiting. Time dilated, stretched thin by fear. Their movements echoed strangely, amplified and distorted by the stone passages, sometimes distant, sometimes terrifyingly near. "Got to be in here," one voice growled, the sound chillingly close. "Leave no trace, no witnesses. Boss'll skin us if this gets out," the other replied, his tone tight with malice. I pressed myself deeper, willing myself invisible, scarcely drawing breath. A flashlight beam sliced across the chamber, sweeping past my hiding place. For one heart-stopping instant, I was certain I'd been found. But the light moved on. Their voices receded down another tunnel. How long I remained wedged in that stony embrace, paralyzed by fear, I cannot say. It felt like lifetimes. Eventually, an absolute silence descended, but still I waited, distrustful, certain it was a ruse. Only when the faint light filtering from above began to soften, signaling dusk's approach, did I dare to uncurl my cramped limbs. Every muscle protested. Slowly, testing each step, I navigated back through the subterranean twists. Emerging into the forest felt like a rebirth. The world was bathed in the rich, melancholic gold of sunset. No sign of the men. Against all odds, I had endured. On legs that felt like borrowed stilts, I began the long walk back. Full darkness had claimed the woods by the time I stumbled into the ranger station. A wreck of soaked clothes, mud, scratches, my eyes wide with exhaustion and the lingering imprint of terror. My colleagues reacted with stunned disbelief as my story tumbled out. Armed men, the chase, the hunt. They had been on the verge of initiating a search, alarmed by my prolonged silence, my failure to check in. The ensuing days were a maelstrom of official reports, interviews with law enforcement, internal Park Service investigations. They located signs of the poachers' extensive operation, hidden weapon stashes, more sophisticated traps, even a rudimentary processing site deep within the preserve. But the men themselves vanished, like wraiths into the dense woods they'd violated. In the weeks that followed, as patrols intensified and new security measures took root, I wrestled with the aftermath. The forest, once my sanctuary, now felt laced with menace. Shadows seemed deeper, sudden noises jolted me. Yet slowly, inexorably, as the sharp edges of the nightmare softened, fear transmuted into a cold, hard resolve. These men had desecrated my territory, threatened the lives I was sworn to protect, and attempted to erase me for witnessing their crimes. I would not grant them victory by surrendering to fear. I returned to my patrols, my senses honed to an almost painful acuity. I shared my experience, training fellow rangers to recognize the subtle signatures of serious poaching. We overhauled safety protocols, upgraded communication gear. Sometimes, walking the familiar trails, my gaze still sweeps the tree line, half expecting to see camouflage detach itself from the foliage. The snap of a twig can still rabbit punch my heart. But then I'll see a doe step delicately into a sunlit clearing, or watch river otters spiral in the current, and the purpose settles back into place. This forest remains my charge, my home. Whatever dangers conceal themselves within its depths, I will continue to stand sentinel. That is the essence of being a ranger, a guardian poised between the wild and those who would plunder it, regardless of the cost. So, should you find yourself wandering whispering pines and notice a ranger whose eyes linger on the woods with uncommon intensity, it might be me. I'm no longer just scanning for lost hikers or casual rule breakers. I search for shadows that drift against the wind, for the unnatural gleam of metal where none should lie. Because I learned firsthand that the most dangerous predators sometimes walk upright, and I will not suffer them to hunt in my forest again. The rain came down like judgment around 2 a.m, a relentless drumming against the glass. I was adrift in the living room's dimness, lights extinguished, the curtains drawn just enough to admit fractured slivers of the sodden world outside. My phone screen cast a pale glow on my face as I scrolled, the silence inside a stark contrast to the deluge. Earlier, the television's flickering inanity had offered no solace, so I'd silenced it. My apartment is compact. This main room bleeds into a short corridor, flanked by the kitchen on the left, terminating at the bedroom door. The front entrance opens onto a meager, covered porch, crowned by a single, bare bulb. I distinctly recalled verifying its function before settling into the gloom. It had cast its usual weak yellow circle. Above the doorframe, a modest security camera kept vigil, aimed towards the driveway and the few steps leading up. Motion triggered an alert on my phone. Rudimentary security, but present. That night, the heavens wept with unusual ferocity. Water gushed from the eaves, splashing violently onto the concrete path below. Through the thin fabric of the curtains, the outside world was a theater of suggestion. Passan headlights occasionally scythed across the walls, momentarily illuminating faint, distorted shapes beyond the window pane. Cars sloshed by, their beams painting fleeting geometries on my ceiling. My attention, however, was elsewhere, mind untethered. Then, a presence, an anomaly against the familiar patterns of rain and shadow. A silhouette had materialized on the porch, stark against the curtain's weave. It resembled a person, utterly immobile. A wrongness prickled the air. No footfall had announced an arrival, no creak from the weathered porch planks. My front door, notoriously flimsy, would rattle subtly under the slightest pressure, yet silence had reigned, broken only by the storm. Nevertheless, the form stood there, a dark obelisk behind the sheer fabric. I froze, breath caught somewhere between my lungs and throat. My gaze remained fixed on the shape, resisting the urge to rush the window. From my seat, I simply watched. A frantic pulse began to thrum against my ribs, the muscles knotting at the base of my skull. Slowly, deliberately, I rose from the couch, striving for absolute quiet. Had they seen the phone's glow? Did they know I was aware? I edged nearer the window. The figure remained steadfastly still. A hood, perhaps, obscured the head. Just a tall, motionless structure defined by its outline. Sidestepping, I fumbled for my phone. The screen remained stubbornly dark. No notification from the camera app. Disquiet coiled in my gut. If someone occupied the porch, why the digital silence? I launched the application. The camera feed blinked online, displaying the familiar scene. Rain-slicked porch, glistening driveway, the distant street lamp's reflection shimmering on the wet asphalt. Empty, utterly devoid of any human presence. I glanced back at the curtain. The shape persisted, a definite silhouette. Yet on my screen, there was nothing but the storm-lashed porch. A wave of dizziness washed over me. Closing the app, I padded softly towards the door, its small peephole a dark eye in the wood. A deep inhalation. Then I pressed my own eye against the cool glass, half expecting another orb to be staring back. Nothing. The porch lay vacant, rain skittering across the boards, pooling slightly in a low corner near the edge. The porch light glowed faithfully. No one. I retreated, risked another look at the curtain. The shape had dissolved. Gone. Lifting the fabric's edge, I peered directly outside. An empty porch confirmed the camera's view and the peephole's truth. The street beyond slumbered, sidewalks gleaming under the downpour. From my vantage point, no footprints marred the wet ground, though discerning such details from indoors felt futile. Unlocking the deadbolt, I eased the door open. A gust of damp air swirled inside, chilling my bare feet as I stepped onto the threshold, my socks instantly absorbing the moisture. Left, then right. Only the ceaseless rain and the deserted street met my gaze. The nearest house remained dark, inert. No flicker of movement disturbed the scene. I scanned the porch corners, the saturated ground nearby littered with plastered leaves. No impressions in the muddy verge beside the steps. Nothing amiss, save for that slowly expanding puddle where the wind drove the rain beneath the shallow roof. The air was raw, cold. A clammy sweat prickled my back, my shirt clinging uncomfortably. My hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Retreating inside, I secured the lock, my mind racing. Imagination, hallucination. Yet the image felt so solid, so undeniable. My heart still hammered an erratic rhythm against my ribs. I forced myself towards calmness, considering the camera's history again. Back on the couch, I navigated the app's timeline of motion events. 15 minutes prior, a brief clip capturing wind-driven rain. Nothing before or after that indicated a visitor. I delved into the settings, sensitivity cranked high, detection zones correctly configured. It should have registered anyone standing squarely on the porch. And yet, nothing. Sleep felt impossible. The rain's drumming was now an oppressive weight. My thoughts circled relentlessly back to the figure. Tall, hooded, utterly still. I hadn't conjured it. It had stood there. Rising again, I approached the front window, parting the curtain fully. The porch light illuminated empty, wet space. The street remained a desolate ribbon of rain. I paced the confines of the living room, a caged frustration building within me. Calling the authorities seemed ludicrous. Report what? A phantom? There was no damage, no attempted entry, no tangible threat. Logic offered flimsy reassurances. Perhaps someone had stepped onto the porch momentarily and departed unseen. Perhaps a momentary camera glitch, a known if infrequent issue. It had missed deliveries before. But that failed to reconcile the discrepancy. seeing the figure clearly through the curtain, only for it to vanish the instant I checked the peephole. I decided to re-examine the door itself. Handle, deadbolt, frame. All secure, seemingly undisturbed. The rain outside provided a constant, rushing, white noise. I strained my ears for any alien sound. Footsteps on the lawn, a twig snapping. Silence. Side windows were locked tight. The backyard gate, I remembered checking earlier, was latched. No rational evidence suggested an intruder or a lurker. Still, the unease clung to me like the damp air. Seeking distraction, I made instant coffee, the ritual a small anchor in the swirling uncertainty. It was far too late for caffeine, but normalcy felt necessary. As the kettle shrieked, I stood in the kitchen, repeatedly glancing towards the living room, half convinced the silhouette would reappear against the furniture. Only the empty space greeted me, dimly lit by the street lamp's ambient glow. Coffee mug warming my hands, I returned to the window, pulling the curtain aside completely now. I stared out at the porch, the rain's rhythm a dull thud on the roof overhead. The weak bulb cast its lonely yellow circle on the glistening floorboards. My eyes fixed on the puddle. It had grown, fed by a steady drip from the roof's edge. Tiny ripples disturbing its surface as the wind shifted. I watched for a long time, perhaps 15 minutes. Nothing stirred. Eventually, the coffee cooled. I set the mug down. One more check of the camera. Tapping the app, the live feed sprang to life. Empty porch, empty drive, the neighbor's darkened house across the way. Standard. I scrolled the motion clips again. Rain. A passing car from hours ago. That was the extent of it. Weariness began to dull the edge of my fear, replaced by a profound annoyance. I resolved again to attempt sleep. Leaving the living room light burning this time, a small concession to my frayed nerves. I walked the short hall to my bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar, an open channel to the sounds of the house. The rain persisted, a monotonous, unwavering presence. I lay atop the covers, fully clothed, eyes tracing patterns on the darkened ceiling. The image remained burned onto my retinas. The tall shape, shoulders squared, head canted slightly. Watching me. Had it seen me react? Perhaps 20 minutes passed before restlessness drove me up again. Sleep wouldn't take. Back in the living room's artificial light, I decided on a final, thorough inspection. I retrieved an old, stiff umbrella from the closet. Unlocking the front door, I stepped out onto the slippery porch, the scent of wet earth and asphalt sharp in my nostrils. Another scan. Empty street. My car a dark, droplet-beaded shape in the drive. No footprints visible near it. The lawn was a sodden expanse. I descended the steps, the umbrella offering scant protection as I stood fully in the downpour, my already damp socks forgotten. I circled the house, phone flashlight cutting a weak beam across the drenched grass and scattered leaves. Nothing. No impressions. No hidden figure. Around back, the fence stood solid, the gate securely latched. I stood listening intently. Only the rain answered. Returning to the front porch, I paused, looking back at my own front door from the outside. The camera perched above, its small indicator light confirming it was active. Standing here, I was squarely in its field of vision. I raised my phone, opened the app, switched to the live view. There I was on the screen, umbrella held aloft against the rain. Proof positive. The camera was functioning perfectly now. Why then had it been blind earlier? Back inside, lock secured. A sliver of reassurance settled. Perhaps it was a prank. Someone darting onto the porch, standing stock still, then fleeing. But the speed? The utter lack of trace? I resigned myself to waiting out the night. I switched on the TV, volume barely audible, my ears tuned primarily to the world outside the walls. The rain, tireless, continued its assault. Around 4, another glance out the window revealed only the familiar emptiness. Exhaustion finally began to win. I killed the TV, left the living room light burning, and retreated to bed. This time, lying down felt different. My pulse was steady, my breathing even. Calm, or perhaps just resignation, settled over me. Maybe it had been a trick of the light, a shadow cast by passing headlights interacting strangely with the curtains. I tried to reconstruct the moment, just a shape, devoid of detail or color. Plausible deniability. Sleep eventually claimed me in fragmented bursts. Dawn arrived with silence. The rain had ceased. My room was still. First light filtered through the window. I rose and immediately checked the porch. Wet, but otherwise unremarkable. Grabbing paper towels, I went outside to mop up the lingering puddle. The air felt scoured clean, carrying the fresh scent of damp earth. The street looked ordinary. Early risers were starting their commutes. A neighbor pulling out of his driveway offered a brief nod. I returned it. Neither of us spoke of nocturnal oddities. Back inside, I checked the camera feed one last time in the daylight. It had diligently recorded my umbrella excursion, my puddle-drying efforts, the neighbor driving past. Everything perfectly normal now. I scrolled back again, meticulously, to the time of the sighting. Just rain. Static shots of rain. No explanation ever surfaced. I examined the porch structure, looking for any post or object that could mimic a human form in shadow. Nothing matched the distinct, solid shape I'd witnessed. I considered the camera's sensitivity settings, the possibility of a blind spot, however improbable on such a small porch. Ultimately, I had to let it go, absorb it into the catalogue of the unexplained. I made breakfast, changed my clothes, forced myself into the rhythm of the day. Yet every glance towards the front door conjures the memory. That still silent figure stand a sentinel in the downpour, present to my eyes alone, then vanishing utterly, unseen by technology, leaving no trace but a residue of fear. I never found an answer. Nothing like it has happened since. Not yet. To shed the clamor of the world, I sought this perch high in the mountains, yearning for an austere rhythm, the solace of sharp air and profound silence. That inaugural night, contentment settled deep in my bones. But the second sundown bled differently across the snow. A presence declared itself, unseen yet palpable, a gaze fixed upon my sanctuary from the surrounding wilderness. No proof materialized, only the prickling certainty of being observed. Slowly it began to coalesce, a silhouette standing sentinel among the pines as twilight deepened. Now the nights are taut wires of apprehension, and the days offer little respite. Isolation, I'd believed, was the cure. Now stranded within it, doubt festers. Weeks have passed since my arrival. I recall the heave of bags onto the rough-hewn floor, the satisfying thud of logs stacked beside the hearth, the methodical sweep of my gaze into every shadowed recess. The dwelling is modest, one primary chamber encompassing a rudimentary kitchen, flanked by a sleeping alcove and a cramped washroom. An old cast-iron stove, squatting centrally, breathes warmth against the pervasive chill. A fire I coax alive from dawn till dusk. Windows, tall and narrow slits, pierce the log walls, fronted by a slender porch tracing the facade and one flank. Beyond lies only an expanse of snowdrifts and the stern verticals of pine and fir. The access road, a mere ribbon winding down the mountain's spine, surrenders to inclement weather. A feature, I'd thought, that promised true seclusion. No drone of neighbors, no hum of traffic. Just Silas and the vast, untamed quiet. The initial days were a blur of settling. Firewood hauled and stacked, garments stowed, the small generator tested, my laptop claiming the scarred surface of the kitchen table. My intent was nebulous, to write, perhaps, or simply to let thought unravel in the stillness, to cleanse the mind's cluttered spaces. Daylight hours passed serenely, punctuated only by the soughing wind sculpting the snow-laden branches or the soft percussion of falling powder. Nightfall amplified the silence, yet peace held. The door bolted, curtains drawn tight, candle flames casting flickering comfort. The first night unfolded, tranquil. It was the second evening, dusk painting the snowfields in bruised purples, that the shift occurred. I stood near a window, tending coffee simmering on the stove, the aroma mingling with wood smoke. A glance outward snagged on something indeterminate at the forest's edge, where the trees massed into deeper shadow. Was it merely the gnarled architecture of a trunk, or something more? My vision strained, sharpened, and caught a flicker. Movement, slow, deliberate, like a shadow detaching itself. Then, stillness, absolute. A cold wave crested in my gut. My pulse quickened its beat. An illusion, I reasoned, a trick of fading light on weary eyes. I turned from the window, poured my coffee, and forced the image from my mind. Later, under a star-strewn sky devoid of lunar light, save for a faint sickle moon, I extinguished the cabin's lamps. Through a sliver in the curtains, I peered into the profound dark. Patience. My eyes slowly drank the dimness, and there, near the base of a towering pine, a faint configuration resolved itself. The unmistakable outline of a human form, yet devoid of feature, detail swallowed by the night. I watched, breath held captive, and swore I saw it glide several paces nearer. My respiration grew shallow, the icy tendrils of unease tracing my spine. Transfixed, I stared, resisting the urge to blink. But blink I did, and in that fraction of darkness, the shape seemed to advance again, subtly but undeniably forward. I recoiled from the window, mind racing. Confront it? Shout? Brandish a light? Instead, paralysis held me, debating the reality of my own senses. Finally, the need to know eclipsed the fear. Retrieving a heavy flashlight from a kitchen drawer, I unbolted the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold struck like a physical blow, my breath pluming white in the torch beam. Snow groaned beneath my boots. I swept the light across the tree line, illuminating stark trunks and drifts. But the space where the figure stood was empty. Nothing. I circled the cabin, the beam cutting arcs through the darkness. Only trees, snow, silence. No tracks disturbed the surface, no sign of passage. Retreating inside, the click of the deadbolt echoed unnaturally loud. Sleep that night was a shallow, elusive thing. Morning light brought a flush of foolishness. Fatigue, shadows, an overactive imagination, plausible culprits. I ventured out to gather more firewood, and then I saw them. Dark impressions stamped into the pristine snow, forming a circuit around the cabin, a complete unbroken loop, perhaps 20 or 30 feet out from the walls. Drawing closer, I examined them. Not the prints of any wild creature. They resembled boot marks, yet significantly larger than my own. I followed the trail, confirming its perfect circularity. The snow within each print was slightly compressed, suggesting a careful, rhythmic pace. My stomach clenched. I scanned the silent surrounding peaks, the empty expanse of white. Nothing stirred but a whisper of wind through the pines. I captured images with my phone, though the low light rendered them murky, inadequate proof. The day unfolded under a pall of anxiety. Mundane tasks, tidying the small space, organizing pantry shelves, became anchors against the rising tide of unease. I checked the generator again, tested the emergency radio. Stepping outside periodically, I scrutinized the tree line under the clarity of daylight. It remained impassive. No flicker of movement, no shapes mimicking humanity. But as the sun commenced its slow descent, dread coiled within me. I built the fire high, secured the door and windows, drew the curtains fast. Attempting to write proved futile, my gaze repeatedly straying to the veiled windows. True evening arrived, and with it, a sound. Faint, yet distinct against the profound quiet, the crunch of snow underfoot. Slow, measured, deliberate steps. I froze, listening intently, my breath catching, knuckles white on the table's edge. The steps persisted for a moment, then ceased. Rising, I moved to the window, easing the curtain aside just enough to see. The darkness was profound, but the shape materialized again, occupying nearly the same position as the night prior. Unmistakably humanoid, perhaps slightly stooped, or was it merely the angle, the play of shadow? My pulse hammered against my eardrums. I reached for the flashlight, but before my fingers closed around it, the figure stepped forward. A visceral jolt shot through me. No face, no discernible clothing, just this solidifying darkness. I yanked the curtain shut. A desperate surge of manufactured bravery warred with trembling hands. I threw the door open abruptly, stabbing the flashlight beam towards the spot. Emptiness greeted me. The silent theater of snow and trees, branches swaying softly. The tremor consuming me now owed more to raw nerves than the biting cold. I strode a few yards from the porch, my voice thinner than intended. "Hello? Who's there?" Silence answered. Circling the cabin yielded nothing. No fresh prints, no disturbance. Just my own ragged breath and the crunch of my boots. After minutes that stretched thin, I retreated, bolted the door, and fought down panic. That night, the flashlight remained clutched in my hand as I drifted in and out of a fitful doze. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers, every sigh of the wind, registered as a potential footfall. Dawn found me exhausted, My first act was to look outside. More footprints. The same circle, renewed, superimposed over the fading impressions from the day before. I examined them closely. The circumference held, precise. Questions swirled, frantic and unanswerable. Who? Why? How did they vanish so completely? A constriction tightened my chest. The urge to pack, to flee, warred with a stubborn refusal to be chased away, compounded by the practical reality of roads likely impassable after the recent snowfall. Yet the thought of leaving hammered persistently. I managed to raise the local ranger station via the crackling radio. I reported a trespasser, someone circling my cabin nocturnally. Did I get a clear look? No. They promised to dispatch someone when possible, perhaps the following day, citing staff shortages. I tried to leash the desperation in my voice, keeping it level. I'm concerned, I stated simply. Someone seems intent on unsettling me. They logged the details, offered assurances of contact. Daylight hours were consumed by labor. Chopping firewood out back demanded focus. The rhythmic swing of the axe a temporary balm. Cold air seared my lungs. Muscles protested. The physical exertion was welcome, yet every so often an involuntary glance shot over my shoulder towards the tree line. The hours bled away under a constant, low-level thrum of anxiety. Mid-afternoon, I walked out to the circle of prints again, studying the unnerving consistency of the stride, the spacing. I tried to extrapolate the walker's height, the type of boot, but the impressions remained maddeningly vague, mere dark hollows in the crystalline snow. Larger than mine, definitely. No discernible tread pattern. Late afternoon bled towards evening, and the familiar tension began its insidious creep. The fading light felt ominous, each moment bringing the sun closer to its dip behind the jagged peaks. I prepared a simple meal, canned stew heated on the stove, but ate distractedly, eyes darting towards the windows. Outside, the sky flared orange, then softened to rose, finally deepening into bruised violet as the sun relinquished its hold. My stomach twisted. I lit a lantern, its steady glow a small defiance against the encroaching dark, and checked the flashlight's batteries once more. Around the time full darkness clamped down, the sound returned, that deliberate crunch-pause crunch. I set my bowl aside, every nerve ending alight. Slow steps drawing nearer. Thud-thud went my heart. My hands shook visibly now. Standing flashlight gripped tight, I moved with forced quietness to the front door, my boots whispering on the floorboards. I turned the deadbolt, paused, listening. The crunching continued, closer now, then stopped. With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched the door open, sweeping the light's beam across the snow. Nothing. The cone of light pierced the darkness, finding only the familiar tableau of snow and trees. I stepped onto the porch, breath shallow and rapid, the hairs on my neck erect. "I know you're out here." The words tore from my throat, ragged, trembling. Silence answered, vast and absolute. No movement disturbed the scene. I slammed the door, heart hammering, and threw the bolt. This time, I resolved to watch. Extinguishing all light save the low-burning lantern behind me, I positioned myself near the window, parting the curtain by a mere inch. The forest was an impenetrable wall of black, requiring long minutes for my eyes to adapt. Then I saw it, closer, perhaps within 30 yards now. It stood utterly still, oriented towards the cabin, towards me. My mouth turned to dust. The pulse in my temples became a deafening drum. I stared, locked in a silent, terrifying communion. It felt like an eternity, compressed into a minute or two. Sweat beaded on my palms. The impulse to grab my phone, to document, warred with the fear of breaking visual contact. As if sensing my thought, the figure seemed to fold downwards, crouching or melting into the snow. I blinked, and it was gone. I scrambled up, stumbling, nearly falling. Outside again, flashlight beam slicing the night. Nothing, no fresh prints near where it had stood, no sign of departure, only the profound cold and the suffocating darkness. An hour I paced the confines of the small cabin, a caged animal, mind skittering. The questions hammered relentlessly. The motive? The method of its vanishing? Scrabbling sounds near the walls? Wind or something else? My body remained coiled, braced for the next sound, the next sight. The flashlight lay beside me on the table, joined now by the heavy iron fire poker. In this state of hypervigilance, I waited out the remaining hours of darkness. As the first hint of gray diluted the blackness, I rose. Outside, the air bit sharp and clean. My eyes burned with sleeplessness. And there they were, the footprints. A perfect circle, refreshed in the night. I searched again for any deviation, any track leading away into the trees. Nothing. As if the walker had simply ceased to exist upon completing the circuit, or descended from the sky and returned the same way. A surge of impotent fury mixed with chilling fear washed over me. I kicked savagely at the snow, disrupting the nearest prints, then stopped, realizing the futility, the potential destruction of evidence. My breath hitched, heart pounding. I just wanted it to end. I remain, still here in this isolated cabin, still awaiting the promised but perhaps mythical arrival of a ranger. A rising storm is predicted. The roads may already be treacherous. Part of me screams to pack, to risk the drive, to escape. Yet another part whispers caution, wonders if I am amplifying shadows, if some local eccentric is playing cruel games. But each night, the shape returns. Each morning, the circle of footprints greets the dawn. Now, as I sit at this table, the sun bleeds its final colors across the snow-laden peaks. I brace myself. My gaze flicks constantly to the windows, anticipating the appearance of that silent form. A knot tightens in my stomach. My shoulders ache with tension. If the crunch in snow begins again tonight, what then? One impulse urges confrontation, a desperate chase into the woods. Another counsels retreat, huddling in a corner, praying for invisibility. There is no peace here, no inspiration found. Only this gnawing dread that escalates with the fading light. I commit these words to the screen because the silence is too vast, the fear too isolating. Perhaps recounting it lends it shape, makes it real for someone else. Perhaps an explanation exists beyond my terrified imaginings. All I know with certainty is that something resides out there in the twilight. And as the sun relinquishes the sky, it emerges step by measured step, drawing its inscrutable circle closer. By morning it will have vanished once more, leaving only those perfect, chilling prints etched in the snow. Too perfect, too controlled. I came seeking solitude, but I am profoundly, terrifyingly not alone. And that is the one truth this wilderness has taught me. A clench low in my ribs started the second my boots hit the ground beside the car. The air hung thick, saturated, smelling profoundly of decay, old timber and sodden earth. My companion's cabin perched precariously at the lip of a steep track, hemmed in by sentinel pines that stood near black against the bruised late afternoon canvas. Above us, the mountain's peak vanished into wreathing mists, clouds coiling in languid, hypnotic gyres. Relaxation was the stated purpose of this journey, yet my gut soured with a premonition I couldn't name. Fatigue from the long drive, I reasoned, though some intrinsic quality of that looming massif unsettled me to the core. Leo, my friend, materialized beside me, a sudden clap on my shoulder startling me. "Get inside," he urged, his voice cheerful against the gloom, "before this soup thickens." Wordlessly, I trailed him onto the narrow porch, its ancient planks protesting beneath our weight. The cabin's interior felt constricted. A small common room bled into a diminutive kitchen, adjacent to a single bath and 2 sleeping chambers. Leo explained his frequent weekend pilgrimages, extolling the virtues of the vistas, when visible, and the clarifying power of profound isolation. My gaze drifted over dust-furred shelves, a flickering overhead bulb casting erratic shadows, heavy curtains drawn like eyelids against the encroaching dusk. An airless quality permeated the space. Still, I forced a casual demeanor. We deposited my duffel in the spare room, then convened at a scarred table for a hasty meal. I observed how the window panes seemed filmed with white from the outside, despite the mild temperature. Leo waved a hand dismissively. "The mist here," he remarked. "It finds every fissure. Nothing to fret over." Dinner concluded, I retreated to my assigned quarters. Sleep, I anticipated, would be a welcome balm. Instead, the night amplified every sound. Wind gathered force, lashing the pines outside with audible fury. A sliver of window left ajar admitted a chill draft that ghosted across my face. The cabin itself seemed to breathe with the gusts, timbers issuing a rhythmic sequence. Strain, silence, groan, silence. I lay supine, tracking patterns on the shadowed ceiling, consciously slowing my respiration. Around midnight, exhaustion finally weighted my eyelids, pulling me under. How long I remained submerged, I cannot say. Consciousness returned with a jolt, precipitated by an unnatural cold caressing my cheeks. A diaphanous white vapor drifted within the room's confines. I pushed myself upright, blinking furiously, struggling to orient myself within the strange miasma. Beside my bed, a silhouette took form. My heart commenced a frantic drumming against my ribs. My mouth turned to dust. It possessed the unmistakable shape of a person, utterly immobile. A choked gasp escaped me, paralysis momentarily claiming my limbs. The form remained dark, yet I discerned shoulders, a head, arms held stiffly at its sides, a sentinel in the encroaching fog. A scream built in my throat, but died soundlessly. Tremors seized my hands, and despite the glacial air, sweat beaded on my brow. My fingers scrabbled blindly for the lamp on the nightstand. A click, a flood of light, and the presence evaporated. The fog lingered, swirling softly in the electric glare. But the space beside my bed was empty. Perched on the mattress edge, I rubbed grit from my eyes, the frantic pulse throbbing now in my temples. A phantom of the eye, I told myself. A waking dream fragment. Perhaps the altitude, the humidity, some trick of weary perception. With conscious effort, I reclined, pulling the covers high, my gaze fixed on the room's deepest shadows, until the first hint of dawn diluted the blackness. At breakfast, I ventured the question, had Leo ever encountered anything unusual within these walls at night? He responded with a hearty laugh, shaking his head. Altitude sickness, he diagnosed easily. Or dehydration. Fog plays tricks, you know. I offered no rebuttal, though a persistent tremor lingered in my hands, my mouth still arid. Leo pressed a bottle of water upon me, suggesting a brief hike to dispel the mental cobwebs. Thinking the crisp air might indeed prove restorative, I acquiesced. We embarked on a slender trail meandering through the pines, a carpet of shed needles muffling our footfalls. Fog drifted in amorphous patches, sometimes swirling about our ankles like spectral hounds, then lifting to reveal glimpses of the path ahead. I attempted to ground myself in the physical act of walking, the pressure of my boots on the yielding earth, the nascent burn in my calves, the brittle snap of twigs underfoot. Yet the wind continued its capricious dance, sculpting the fog into ever-changing forms. Leo moved with an easy familiarity, but each time my gaze strayed towards the churning vapor obscuring the heights, a dull weight settled in my chest. Perhaps an hour passed before the trail widened into a small clearing, a vantage point promising on clearer days breathtaking scope. Today, however, offered only a canvas of churning alabaster. It felt as though we stood upon the precipice of oblivion. Wind howled around this exposed knoll, yet visibility shrank to mere feet. "Time to head back," Leo announced, adding with a chuckle, "No grand spectacle in this muck." I nodded, distracted. A faint susurrus had reached my ears like far-off voices carried on the wind. Straining, I tried to locate the source, but it seemed to emanate from the fog itself, enveloping us. Too indistinct for words, it nonetheless possessed a human quality, the murmur of a distant crowd. "Hear that?" I asked Leo. He shrugged, attributing it to the wind's passage through the timber, amplified and distorted by the dense fog. I tried to dismiss it, but as we retraced our steps, the whispering intensified, coalescing into a low, overlapping chorus of lament. Not loud, but clear enough to raise the hairs on my neck. A sideways glance confirmed Leo remained oblivious, intent on navigating the path. A sickening lurch occurred in my stomach. Cold sweat bloomed anew. My pace quickened involuntarily. "You all right?" Leo called back. I managed a nod, murmured an affirmative while sheer panic began to constrict my lungs. Reaching the cabin felt like breaching a sanctuary. I practically stumbled inside, heart hammering, the stale, familiar scent of the interior suddenly preferable to the boundless, whispering white outside. Leo offered coffee. I accepted gratefully. We sat again at the worn table. He fiddled with an old radio perched near the window, coaxing, crackling static and the faint, intermittent voice of a distant announcer discussing an approaching storm front. It was mere background noise. My mind replayed the disembodied voices, turning them over, questioning their reality. That afternoon, seeking to dispel the lingering tension, Leo proposed an excursion to a nearby waterfall. I demurred, citing a need for rest, and he departed alone. the silence he left behind pressed down, heavy and expectant. Stepping onto the porch for air, I found the fog had momentarily retreated, revealing the wooden steps and a patch of stony ground. I drew a deep breath, striving for composure. A faint dripping sound drew my attention to the side of the cabin. Water trickled from a damaged gutter, pooling at the foundation, releasing the rich scent of damp earth. Somewhere behind me a branch snapped sharply. My heart leaped. I spun around. Nothing but trees dissolving into mist. Yet the distinct sensation of being observed prickled my skin. My shoulders tensed. I ground my teeth, standing stock still for several seconds, waiting. When only silence answered, I retreated indoors, securing the lock behind me. As afternoon bled into evening, the clouds lowered, darkening ominously. Leo returned, reporting the waterfall diminished to a mere trickle. "Feeling better?" he inquired. A non-committal shrug was my only reply. He suggested a fire in the small hearth. I agreed, hoping its warmth and flickering light might soothe my frayed nerves. We gathered logs, coaxed flames to life, and settled onto the couch. The fire crackled, spitting embers, a small point of cheer in the deepening gloom. Conversation languished. I watched the flames writhe, feeling almost normal for a fleeting interlude. But with true nightfall, the fog returned, pressing against the window panes until they glowed like vacant, luminous rectangles. A palpable chill invaded the room. Leo bid me good night and retired. I lingered by the hearth a while longer before finally steeling myself for bed. My room felt colder than the previous night. I ensured the window was latched tight. Nevertheless, a thin tendril of fog was visibly creeping beneath the door. My pulse accelerated. I wedged a towel against the threshold, a futile barrier. My throat felt constricted. Extinguishing the lamp, I burrowed under the covers, acutely aware of my own ragged breathing in the profound dark. An hour, perhaps more, passed in sleepless vigilance. Then the familiar chill touched my skin again. The towel at the door was visibly damp, and fog drifted into the room regardless. I sat bolt upright. At the foot of my bed stood three forms, motionless, their outlines softened by the white haze, yet undeniably present. Shoulders, heads, indistinct limbs. My stomach twisted violently. A hot surge of adrenaline coursed through me. My chest seized, making breath a desperate struggle. The metallic tang of fear coated my tongue. I yearned to cry out for Leo, but terror sealed my lips, convinced that any sound would galvanize these presences, draw them closer. With trembling fingers, I forced myself to activate the bedside lamp. Instantly, the room appeared empty once more. The fog eddied, disturbed by unseen currents, but the apparitions had vanished. My hand shook uncontrollably as I reached for my phone. No signal, just a dead icon. I cycled the lamp off, then on, off, on, a frantic test, half expecting the figures to reappear in the darkness. Sweat slicked my back. Nothing. Eventually, I lay back down, though my heart refused to slow its frantic rhythm. Morning found me hollow-eyed and raw. I confronted Leo directly, stating plainly, "There were people in my room last night." His response echoed his previous dismissals: illusions, fog, altitude, but now tinged with annoyance, as if my fear were a personal affront to his cherished mountain escape. Leaving felt imperative, yet some stubborn part of me resisted, needing to understand, to prove my sanity. Leo departed for supplies. I stood on the porch gazing at the peaks shrouded in their perpetual gray veil. A decision formed. I would walk again, alone. Armed with a flashlight and water, I chose a different trail, one descending into denser woods. The path proved narrower, strewn with rocks, demanding careful footing. Fog enveloped me swiftly, reducing visibility to a scant few yards. Silence reigned, broken only by the crunch of my own steps. Then the voices returned, a soft susurrus at first, swelling gradually into waves of sound, as if hundreds of unseen entities murmured just beyond the veil of mist. My heart pounded, dizziness threatened. My legs locked, and I crouched low, sweeping the flashlight beam in frantic arcs. The light illuminated only swirling vapor. "Hello?" My voice emerged small, tremulous. The echo returned warped, distorted, followed by what sounded like whispered replies, unintelligible yet undeniably responsive. Visceral terror surged. I turned, scrambling back towards the cabin, each step leaden, my boots slipping on the slick, damp leaves. The wind rose, and the voices seemed to swell with it, a vast, unseen chorus. My hands shook violently. I kept the flashlight beam fixed on the ground before me, desperate not to fall. Somehow, I regained the cabin, slamming the door and throwing the bolt. I paced the confines of the living room, breath coming in harsh gasps, clothes clinging damply, a chill settling deep in my bones. Leo returned an hour later, laden with groceries. I recounted my experience, the surrounding voices, the suffocating panic. He looked concerned, yet his skepticism remained palpable. He reiterated his familiar litany: altitude, cold, sensory tricks, the need for rest. Defeated, I subsided. One more night, I resolved. Then, escape. That evening, we attempted distraction via an old movie on a small television. The reception patchy and ghost-ridden. It offered temporary, fractured solace. Outside, the wind intensified, rattling the window frames with alarming force. Around 10, Leo declared his intention to sleep. I remained awake, eyes fixed on the flickering screen long after exhaustion blurred the images. Finally, I dragged myself to my bedroom. The floor near the door was damp again, the musty odor of wet fabric sharp in the air. I checked the window latch, confirmed it secure, stuffed a fresh towel against the threshold, changed into dry clothes, climbed beneath the covers, but this time I left the lamp burning. I focused on steadying my breath, my eyes stinging with fatigue. Sometime later, I must have drifted off despite the light. My eyes snapped open. The lamp still shone, but the room was now thick with fog, a dense, choking cloud. The invasive cold kissed my face, and they were back. Closer now. At least 2 distinct shapes stood motionless, their outlines sharper, more defined than before, barely an arm's length from the edge of the bed. My scalp prickled. My chest felt crushed by an invisible weight. Thought dissolved into pure, primal panic. I flailed for the lamp switch, my trembling fingers fumbling before finding purchase. Darkness swallowed the room, and with it, the figures vanished. I flicked the light back on. Gone. My breath hitched in short, painful gasps. Sleep was now an impossibility. I sat huddled, wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide, scanning the room's shadowed corners, expecting their return at any moment. By dawn, My eyes were bloodshot slits, my limbs heavy with exhaustion and dread. "I'm leaving," I informed Leo, my voice flat, devoid of inflection. He attempted persuasion, suggesting one more night might break the spell, but the thought was intolerable. His opinion no longer mattered. Packing was a swift, mechanical act. Outside, standing beside my car, I tilted my head back, looking towards the summit. Fog clung to it like a burial shroud. The air felt thick, oppressive. For a fleeting second, the wind carried a faint echo of those whispers. My stomach churned. I wrenched open the car door, slid inside. Leo waved from the porch, a solitary figure against the weathered wood. The engine caught. One final glance at the cabin, nestled ominously against the pines, and I pulled away. Descending the rough mountain road, I felt the frantic rhythm in my chest gradually subside, the tension easing from my shoulders with each mile gained. The fog thinned, relinquishing its hold. Reaching the main highway felt like surfacing, the sun filtering weakly through scattered clouds, a welcome benediction. I could breathe again, truly breathe. What transpired on that mountain remains an enigma. Leo would call it hallucination, a product of altitude and atmosphere, perhaps. But the place hadn't felt empty. It felt aware, watchful, sentient in its own chilling way. I carry no desire to return, ever. Even now, recalling those silent waiting forms sends an icy trace across the back of my neck. Some places are best left undisturbed, their secrets kept at a permanent, safe distance. The house beckoned with a price that felt less like a bargain and more like a dare. Its bones were old, the listing boasted, spanning more than a century. Minor dilapidations, the seller had murmured, nothing beyond the expected wear of time. The street slept under a canopy of ancient trees, and the notion of inhabiting a place saturated with history held a certain allure. My expectations were simple. Carve out a space to call my own. Satisfaction bloomed, warm and certain, the moment the keys were mine. High ceilings soared above, vast windows promised light, and an immense attic whispered of untapped potential. Surely I'd stumbled upon a hidden gem. Then came the susurrus. It began the first night, a thread of sound woven into the fabric of near sleep. Above me a soft disturbance, like my name, Leo, exhaled on a dying breath. So faint it might have been dreamt. I slid from bed, feet finding the cool floorboards, and padded into the hallway. The light switch yielded only a stuttering flicker from the bulb overhead. I stood motionless, straining to hear. Near the hall's terminus hung the square outline of the attic access panel. From that direction, the whispers seemed to emanate, only to dissolve the instant I drew near. No palpable strangeness yet, merely the low-grade unease of navigating unfamiliar shadows. A glance upward at the sealed hatch, a faint shiver tracing my spine, and I retreated to the bedroom, chalking it up to fatigue, to imagination. Dawn arrived, bringing with it a determination to forget. Unpacking became a welcome distraction. Shelves climbed the living room walls. The kitchen yielded lunch. I found myself charmed by the antiquated fixtures, brass handles on the deep sink, intricately detailed, a pantry redolent with the dry perfume of aged wood. Normalcy reigned until the late afternoon sun slanted low. Lounging on the sofa, phone in hand, the whispers returned. That same delicate invocation of my name, echoing for a breath or two before vanishing. A phantom current stirred the air, though no windows stood open. I rose, prowled the rooms, tested the locks. Nothing amiss. The sound, untraceable, still hinted at origins overhead. Resolve hardened. The attic demanded exploration. Flashlight clutched, I ascended. The hatch resisted, stiff with disuse, yielding with a groan that protested the intrusion. Each step on the pull-down stairs sang a loud, creaking complaint. Reaching the top, I was met by an abrupt plunge in temperature. Not frigid, but a distinct sharp contrast to the warmth below. Stale air thick with dust motes filled my lungs. The space unfolded, skeletal remains of chairs, derelict boxes slumped in corners, scattered tools like forgotten intentions, and against the far wall, a substantial trunk. A lone naked bulb cast a weak circle of light, leaving the periphery steeped in shadow. I scanned the expanse, breath catching, attention coiling in my shoulders. Gooseflesh prickled the nape of my neck. Was that another sound? A sigh, perhaps, impossibly faint? My flashlight beam stabbed into the deepest corner. Stillness. Drawn by an unnamed curiosity, I approached the trunk. Locked. A tentative shake produced a dull internal thud, something heavy shifting within. My pulse leaped, a formless dread blooming in my chest, illogical yet potent. Then behind me, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard. I spun, light beam slashing through the gloom. Empty. Swallowing hard against a dry throat, I called out, "Hello?" The words sounded frail, overloud in the waiting silence. No answer came. Retreating felt less like a decision, more like an instinct, half persuaded I was merely spooking myself. That night, the whispers gained substance. Brushing my teeth, the sound surfaced again, clearer this time. "Leo." My heart hammered against my ribs. I spat, twisted the faucet silent. The house held its breath. Opening the bathroom door, I peered down the umbral corridor, listening intently. It came again. "Leo." Drawn out, lingering on the vowels. Ice traced my spine. My hand trembled uncontrollably. I fled to my bedroom, slammed the door, snapped on the lamp. Perched on the edge of the bed, heart thundering, I fought for calm, reciting rational explanations, settling foundations, drafts, knowing with chilling certainty the lie. Morning found me purchasing cameras. A basic security setup from a local electronics shop felt like a necessary concession to the unease gnawing at me. One lens I positioned in the hallway, gazing eternally at the attic hatch. Another went inside the attic itself, trained on the trunk and the darkest corner. Continuous recording engaged. A part of me felt foolish, succumbing to paranoia, yet the need for tangible proof of an intruder, of something, overruled the embarrassment. The day passed in deceptive tranquility. Dinner cooked, television watched, thoughts of the whispers forcibly suppressed. Later, seated before my computer, I began the vigil, scrolling through hours of footage. Nothing. The attic camera displayed only dust motes dancing in stagnant air. The hallway lens captured my own mundane movements. No trespassers, no spectral anomalies. Relief warred with lingering doubt. Then I noticed the audio waveforms. Spikes punctuated the silence at irregular intervals. Playing back a corresponding clip yielded only faint static. But cranking the volume to maximum revealed it. A low guttural murmur. indecipherable. Pressing headphones tight against my ears, straining, I thought I could discern my own name, surfacing like flotsam from the sonic mire. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot through me. No visible presence, yet the microphone had captured something. I meticulously marked time codes, saved the files. Sleep offered no refuge. Tossing, turning, the attic loomed large in my mind. Around 2 a.m, a dream took hold. I stood within the attic's dusty confines. In the far corner where light faltered stood a man clad in a severe black suit, motionless, silent. His face remained obscured, a frustrating blur just beyond focus. My feet felt leaden, fused to the floorboards. I couldn't look away. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The phone screen glowed. 2:10 a.m. Wiping my face on my sleeve, I wrestled my breathing back under control, eventually succumbing to a thin, restless sleep. The following day, I returned to the attic, hoping daylight would dispel the shadows. Sunlight filtered through the small, grimy windows, rendering the space less overtly menacing. Yet the moment I ascended, my skin prickled anew. The image of the man in the black suit superimposed itself onto the shadowed corner. I crossed again to the trunk. The lock, ancient and tinged with rust, resisted my tugs and jerks. Breaking it open seemed the next logical step, but the necessary tools remained downstairs. Instead, I turned to the scattered boxes, mostly void. One yielded brittle newspapers yellowed with age, dated from the 60s. Another contained a fractured lamp, tarnished silverware. Nothing extraordinary, nothing to explain the disembodied voices. I dedicated the remainder of the day to banishing the gloom. A brighter LED fixture replaced the feeble bulb. I swept the rough floorboards, shoved the trunk tight against the wall, attempted to impose order on the accumulated detritus. An exercise in control, I hoped. All the while, a tightness constricted my chest, an unnerving anticipation humming beneath my skin, waiting for the whispers to resume. My nerves stretched taut, but the attic remained stubbornly silent throughout my labors. Night fell. Another review of the camera feeds. Again, visually unremarkable. The audio, however, pulsed with those familiar, disturbing spikes. Listening to segments confirmed the low murmur, a sound that now stirred a visceral nausea. Shutting down the computer, I sought refuge in mindless television, hoping exhaustion would claim me. Around midnight, I headed for bed, leaving the hallway light burning, a small defiance against the encroaching dark. Sleep came quickly, only to usher back the dream. The man in the black suit stood closer this time, mere steps away, his silhouette sharp, distinct, yet his face remained swallowed by shadow. My dream heart raced, accompanied by the relentless whispered chorus of my name. I woke to the sound of my own muffled voice, uttering forgotten words. My arms ached, jaw sore from clenching. Sitting bolt upright, I stared into the bedroom's darkness, pierced only by the thin blade of light beneath the door. No whispers now, but the oppressive sensation of being watched intensified. Rising, I opened the door, scanned the empty hall, forced myself to check the attic hatch, closed tight. Returning to my room, I locked the door, lying awake for a long time, eyes wide in the dark. The next morning I called Elias, an old friend. An animal in the attic, I suggested vaguely. Perhaps raccoons? The whispers, the dream figure. Those remained unspoken burdens, We searched together, inspecting beams, corners, looking for droppings, nests, points of entry. Nothing. Elias chuckled, suggesting playfully that perhaps the place was haunted. I managed a hollow laugh in return, the unease solidifying in my gut. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, nursing coffee, hands trembling slightly, stomach knotted. My gaze drifted upward, picturing the aged timbers, the locked trunk resting directly above. The house felt sentient, clinging possessively to something hidden. Subsequent nights were spent deploying more audio recorders, planting them like traps in various rooms. Each morning's review yielded more of those baffling sounds, consistently faint, sporadic. Sometimes straining, I thought I parsed fragments. Come closer, perhaps, or stay. Was it real, or my stressed mind desperately seeking patterns in the noise? My appetite waned. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt through me. Locks were checked and rechecked. The dreams persisted. The silent sentinel in the suit, eternally occupying the attic's darkest reach. After a week besieged by this invisible presence, the trunk became an obsession. A trip to the hardware store procured a crowbar. Ascending the attic stairs, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air hung heavy, expectant. I positioned a flashlight on a small stool, its beam focused on the trunk's lock, then wedged the crowbar beneath the latch. It required considerable effort, a straining of muscle against old metal before the lock yielded with a sharp crack. The lid groaned open on stiff hinges. Inside lay a scattering of old clothes, a pair of worn leather shoes, letters bound with a fragile cord, and nestled amongst them, a small photograph in a simple wooden frame. Black and white. A man in a black suit. His face lacked sharp definition, yet the posture, the shape, it was undeniably the figure from my dreams. My throat constricted. My hands trembled as I lifted the photograph. Setting it carefully aside, I sifted through the clothes, their musty scent a testament to decades undisturbed. The shoes were scuffed, well-traveled. The letters, penned in elegant cursive, spoke of the house, but the ink had faded, rendering much illegible. My mind raced, fixated on the man in the photograph, his stiff formality, the absence of a smile. The background vaguely resembled the attic, though details were obscured by time and shadow. I returned everything to the trunk except the photograph. Clutching it, staring into the faded image, I felt it again. That prickling awareness on the back of my neck, the chilling certainty of unseen eyes. I whirled around. Nothing. I left the attic feeling unsteady, disoriented. The nightmares intensified, though their content remained static. The man in the suit never spoke, never moved, simply stood, his unseen gaze fixed upon me. The following day I sought solace in mundane repairs, replacing loose floorboards, silencing a dripping faucet, sweeping the front porch. Physical labor offered temporary distraction, but my nerves remained frayed. Every so often my eyes would dart involuntarily towards the ceiling, half expecting, half dreading. By night the voices seemed amplified, seeping through the very walls. I sat in the living room, every light blazing, and listened. A constant, sibilant hush, like breath shaping my name over and over. The urge to flee, to put miles between myself and this house, warred with a stubborn refusal to be driven out. My chest felt tight, scalp tingling, hands cold and clammy. I pushed back against the rising tide of fear, reminding myself it was just wood, plaster, strange acoustics. Yet a deeper conviction whispered otherwise. I began speaking to the empty air, demanding, "What do you want?" Silence answered, followed by the inevitable, insidious return of my name. Desperate, I tried drowning it out with the television turned loud, but the whispers slid beneath the dialogue, an unnerving counterpoint. Slamming my hands on the coffee table, I yelled, "Stop!" A momentary pause, then the sound resumed, relentless. A profound sense of helplessness washed over me. One last check of the camera feeds. I scrutinized every frame from the attic cam. Dust motes drifted. Shadows lay undisturbed. The audio track remained a chaotic tapestry of static. But then, a flicker. A single frame where the static pattern seemed to coalesce, momentarily forming a shadow. Advancing frame by painstaking frame, I saw it. A silhouette in the corner, its shape uncannily matching the man from my dreams, the man in the photograph. A fleeting presence, there and gone in an instant. My hand shook on the mouse. Panic tightened its icy grip around my chest. The next frame, empty. I replayed the sequence 5 times, confirming. The ephemeral shadow persisted. Saving the file, I shut down the computer, feeling profoundly shaken. My legs felt weak. I sank into my chair, staring at the blank screen, the silhouette seared onto my retinas. It was him. The presence I felt, the source of the whispers, caught, however briefly. He was there, just beyond sight, calling me to the attic. My phone buzzed, startling me violently. Elias asking how settling in was going. "Fine," I lied, the word tasting like ash. "Everything's fine." Admitting the truth felt impossible, risking disbelief, concern I couldn't bear. Sleep that night was fragmented, shallow. Each time I closed my eyes, the black suit materialized. The house seemed to groan around me, alive with tension. The wind rattled the window panes like skeletal fingers. Around 3 a.m. I rose and walked the length of the hallway, stopping directly beneath the attic hatch. Staring up at the pale square against the ceiling, my heart pounded a heavy, suffocating rhythm. I reached up, fingertips brushing the cool metal of the latch, but couldn't summon the will to open it. The air around the hatch felt unnaturally cold, raising the hair on my arm. "What do you want?" I whispered into the pregnant silence. No reply came. My throat felt raw, mouth stale. After a long moment, hands still hovering, I retreated to my room. I remain in this house. The thought of leaving surfaces often, a tempting escape route, but ownership anchors me here. I cannot simply walk away. Understanding has become a compulsion. The cameras continue their silent watch. The recordings are my daily ritual. Sometimes within the murmurs, new words seem to struggle for clarity. Sometimes the tone shifts. Anger, sorrow, longing. The man in the black suit is a permanent resident of my dreams, forever in his corner, half-shrouded, calling. A knot of anxiety tightens in my stomach with every ascent into the attic. The tension in my shoulders is a constant companion. Why this entity chose me, why it lingers just beyond perception, remains unknown. But I am resolved to uncover the truth. This house holds secrets, entwined with the contents of that trunk, the face in the photograph, and the whispers that breathe through its shadowed spaces. I live suspended in this state, feeling it in the frantic leap of my pulse at every unexpected sound, in the stiffness of my muscles, the shallow catch of my breath on the attic stairs. Something resides here, something insistent, demanding acknowledgement, and leaving is no longer an option. This is my house now. I must confront whatever lurks in the darkness.